Well, I'm so pleased to have you back for our second study of the church in Smyrna as found in Revelation 2. Now we're going to, in just a moment, look at that. But if you missed the previous study that gives background, it really is helpful to have that. But before going further, let's look at the scripture, which is Revelation 2, 8 through 11. To the angel of the church in Smyrna write, here are the words of him who is the first and the last, who died and came to life again. I know your afflictions and your poverty, yet you are rich. I know about the slander of those who say they are Jews and are not, but are a synagogue of Satan. Do not be afraid of what you are about to suffer. I tell you, the devil will put some of you in prison to test you, and you will suffer persecution for 10 days. Be faithful, even to the point of death, and I will give you life as your victor's crown. Whoever has ears, let them hear what the Spirit says to the churches. The one who is victorious will not be hurt at all by the second death. Well, we again talked about the background of Smyrna last week, and Christ now, as he does with each of the churches, identifies himself. And what he says is particularly resonates with the people of Smyrna. It's very, very helpful. He says, I am the first and the last. And you'll recall that the book of Revelation opens with Jesus saying, I am the Alpha and the Omega. Now, it says again, who is first and the last. I think most of us know that Alpha was the first letter of the Greek alphabet. Omega was the last letter. It would be like for us in the US to say from A to Z, or for the rest of the English-speaking world, A to Z. So there you go. I tip my hat to you. Anyway, so it would mean that there's, like in our alphabet, nothing that exists can be written not using those letters. They define, everything's defined within that 26 letters of our English alphabet, everything. Now, what Jesus is saying, I define everything. Everything, I designed it, I made it, I did it all. And of course, to the Smyrnians, this was very important to hear. They needed reassurance. They were going through a terrible, terrible time. And they were reminded about their weakness, about how small they were in number, but also in power. They were aware that their lives could end at any time, that their possessions could be confiscated, that their livelihoods taken away from them, that losing their jobs and all the rest. And they were aware that they could be sold into slavery. There were all sorts of things that could happen to them. They were very aware. And it seemed like everybody else had the power. But Jesus, by saying this statement, he was reminding them he had the absolute power and he was holding them in his hands. Now, it's important for us to remember that when we feel that we're so powerless, when we're so weak, when we feel like circumstances are going to overwhelm us. And then he said something else that was very important, and which they would have understood better than probably anybody else in that whole area of Asia. And that was, he said, I am the one who died and came to life again. Well, of course, the resurrection of Christ was the key element of the gospel message, especially in the first generation. It should be in our generation as well. Unfortunately, we kind of keep it to Easter. We talk about the resurrection Easter, and we might make a casual reference to it through the rest of the year. But if you look at the New Testament and you look at the way that they presented the gospel, the fact of the resurrection was mentioned every single time. It was the amazing moment when all that Christ had said was validated, when all that he proclaimed would happen. This was the seal that says this is true. It was remarkable. It was the thing that refuted all the enemies of Christ and of Christianity, was the truth of the resurrection of Christ. It really was quite wonderful. And of course, to the Smyrnians, now remember, Smyrna had been a great city in the past, but had been destroyed and then had been resurrected. And so this theme of resurrection was something that was familiar to them from their own secular history, but also their history as Christians. Now, also, we have another factor in here. Smyrna was one of the centers for the worship of the god Dionysius, or he had another name, but I can't recall it right now. But Dionysius had a festival every year, and the festival included the celebration of that god who died and supposedly came back to life again. The difference, though, with the way they celebrated that was the festival was attended a lot like our Mardi Gras, frankly. It was a time of drunkenness, it was a time of depravity, and really that kind of resurrection, if you will, was a mockery of what Christ had done. And the difference between, of course, the celebration of Dionysius and the celebration of the resurrection of Christ was one was to debauchery and to utter sin, and the other was to honor and to glory. And again, John was one, like, I mean, of all people, he would have been one to marvel at the resurrection of Christ. You recall that when the news came to the disciples that he and Peter ran to the tomb, and that John actually ran into the tomb to see the empty tomb. They knew where Jesus had been laid, but he was gone. And that when Jesus appeared to the disciples, he came into the room, John was there. John was at every post-resurrection appearance of Christ, except on the road to Emmaus. But John was at all of those. And he would have seen the resurrection Christ. He was there the moment Christ ascended into glory on the Mount of Olives. And he would remember that all of the marshaled forces of evil could not keep Christ in the tomb. And he was saying, listen, my friends, the resurrected Christ couldn't be kept in the tomb. And the victory that he brought to the world is yours, and you can be assured of it. Now, of course, he talked about their sufferings in this 9th verse. He says, I know your afflictions and your poverty. We'll talk about slander next week, but we're going to focus on the afflictions and the poverty. They were suffering. Now, the Greek word for suffering that was used, or for afflictions, was thlipsis. Thlipsis, which means literally to be pressed. It's the idea of being in a vice and being that vice just pushing in and pushing in and pushing in, or like being trapped between two rocks and not being able to get out. You can't. You're being compressed more and more and more. It was used of the threshing floor that crushed the wheat or ground and crushed the grapes as it made wine. Now, suffering is something that comes to everybody. I'm getting older, so I take all sorts of pills for this, that, or the other. And some of it is to prevent things, but some of it is to treat things because already parts of my body seem to be falling off. Some of you know where I'm coming from on this. And if I don't take them, I will feel the pain. Now, I even then feel pain. All day yesterday, my knee was acting up, and every time I took a step there, my knee hurt. So there's a kind of suffering that everybody goes through. Whether you're a Christian or not, you have physical suffering. There is emotional suffering that everybody goes through, like the grief of losing somebody. That everybody goes through that. There's the suffering of humiliation. There's a suffering of failure. There's a suffering that comes with a broken heart. Those things come to everybody. So that's not what Jesus is talking about. He's not talking about the suffering that comes because we are human beings, because all humans suffer. Christians, non-Christians, we all suffer. It rains on the just and the unjust, Jesus said. What he's talking about is the suffering that comes specifically because we are Christians. Now, this week, this past week, when we're recording this, there's been a tremendous outbreak of persecution in Pakistan of the Muslims against the Christians. And a number of Christian churches, including Salvation Army Corps, 3 Salvation Army Corps, have been burned. Homes of Christians have been attacked, their furnishings looted. And what they couldn't take, they've taken out and they've burned. You can see that from the pictures I'm showing. And it's been a terrible time. Christians don't dare sleep in their own homes. They're going out into open fields and sleeping. They are suffering specifically because they are Christians. And that's the kind of suffering that people in Smyrna were going through. And friends, if you haven't taken a moment to pray for the suffering of the church in Pakistan, stop this video and pray for them right now, because they're going through a tremendous, tremendous amount of persecution. And it's not just them. There are people all over the world who are living on the edge of persecution. At any moment, things might explode against them, just like they have in Pakistan. It's not just Pakistan. There are all sorts of places. There are places where there are armed bands that come in and just sweep through villages and kidnap and pillage and all the rest and kill. We are in a time of great persecution for the church. And we in the West have some problems. We have laws that go against us. We're having certainly discrimination. Facebook is a good example. It discriminates quite badly against Christians, but we're not going through the persecution that some of our brothers and sisters are. So look, when Jesus is talking about the suffering in Smyrna, just go online and look up what's going on in Pakistan right now, and you'll find out about the type of suffering our friends in Smyrna were going through and the early church went through. So it is not because they're human beings, it's because they name Christ as their Savior. Now, listen, so when suffering comes, what do we do with it? Well, nobody wants to suffer. Nobody in their right mind says, yes, burn my house down. Yes, fire me from my job because I'm a believer. Nobody says that in their right mind. We don't want to suffer. We try to avoid suffering. We try to avoid pain. God made us that way so this human race could survive. But when suffering does come, as it will come, the Christian can not just bear up with the suffering, but show the world how to suffer. And that includes the kind of suffering that comes with the things that happen to everybody. Like if I get cancer, how do I handle my cancer differently than an unbeliever? If I have grief, how do I handle my grief different than an unbeliever? You see, what the Christian can model for the world is how to handle suffering. And that's an important thing. The Smyrnians witnessed by their suffering. And remember, the word martyr, which we use now to talk about someone who suffers and dies for their faith, the original meaning of the word martyr is witness. And that's what we're to do as we witness. So we need to expect suffering and find the blessing in it. Instead, most of us want the blessing and are surprised by the suffering. So when we think about the Smyrnians, think about our fellow believers these days, and ask yourself, if you saw all your furnishings pulled onto the street and burned, if a mob came through your house and cleaned it out, stole everything precious to you, and threatened your life, if you watched someone getting beaten because they were a believer, how would you handle that? And how do we handle it now? Well, that's a challenge to us. There's a challenge to the Smyrnians. And I pray that if you are called upon to suffer, if I'm called upon to suffer, that I would not deny the Christ who died for me, but stand up and count myself as his and take what comes. God bless you.